I happen to have written a book about the Battle of the Bulge called Snow and Steel, and I started researching Hitler's Ardennes offensive. This took place on the 16th of December 1944, and it was Hitler's surprise attack on the American forces in and around the Ardennes area of Belgium and Luxembourg, and the idea was to wrest the initiative back to the Germans, take the Allies by surprise. And the bizarre idea that Hitler had was to surge through the Allied lines, make for the port of Antwerp, which was the Allied logistics base, so a very important place, and split the British and Canadians to the north and the Americans to the south. Now what Hitler hoped was that the coalition ranged against him would blame each other for the loss of the important logistics centre of Antwerp. The coalition would fall apart. That would buy Hitler time to then turn his attention again to the Eastern Front, and the West would be stabilised because the British and American and Canadian coalition would have been in disarray. It's complete and total hogwash. It was never ever going to happen in a million years. The Allies were so integrated at every level, led by a superb leader, General Eisenhower, who thought and spoke coalition. That was his religion. He said, if anyone criticises another nation in my headquarters, they're out. So actually what Hitler, who never understands coalition, he never really allies himself with anyone else. Even if it's with the Italians, it's always the Germans who are superior. There's never any equality. So he doesn't understand coalitions. He's never going to defeat the Allied coalition that way. But it's important to remember, though, that the Ardennes offensive has a political aim. It's launched in December, and if there is a genius, it's that Germany realises, or Hitler realises, you've got to neutralise the threat of Allied air power. And the only way you can do that, because your own air force, the Luftwaffe, isn't strong enough, is to launch an attack in midwinter, when snow and fog will ground the Allied air forces. And that's exactly what happens. But, of course, what you have to remember is sooner or later the clouds will clear, the Allied bombers will come out, and the Germans will be caught, and that's exactly what happens. The Ardennes offensive has about 10 days of miserable weather before the skies clear and the Allied bombers catch the Germans out in the open. So our image of the Ardennes offensive, perhaps coloured by bad Hollywood movies, is of panzer tanks rolling through the forests. That's right. But they don't do that endlessly, and the moment air power is able to be used against them, they wither on the vine. They have absolutely no protection against that. The Germans' best weapon is surprise. We don't see the attack coming. There are all sorts of intelligence failures, and surprise soon wears off. If you emerge out of the forests with huge numbers of tanks and troops, you've probably got about a day and a half while the Allies are in disarray before they get their act together. And that's really the only time in which the Germans can make headway. They have about 2 days before the Allies start to formulate a plan, contain the German breakthrough, and then the rest is inevitable. But what it does is it means that Germany's last reserves of men, tanks, fuel, artillery, rations, everything else that has been husbanded is spent in the West. Once the Battle of the Bulge is over, it lasts a month, there is nothing left in the cupboard for the Germans to defend. The crossing of the Rhine is a damp squib, really, as far as the Allies are concerned. We always thought that would be the big battle. Had the offensive not been launched, the crossing into Germany from the west would have been a lot more violent, and possibly some of those troops and tanks would have also been used to defend Berlin. But the outcome of the Second World War would have been just the same. The two Allied worries were intelligence, and there is a big intelligence failing, and it's still picked over today, because we thought with decoding the German Enigma enciphering machine that we knew all the secrets through Bletchley Park, and of course as the war had moved on to Germany's homeland, the Germans didn't use the Enigma machine. They telephoned each other or sent messages by officer courier. So we didn't realise that the vital information that would have given the secret away wasn't being sent by Enigma at all. But there were warning signals, we just didn't pick them up. Fuel, I think, is the other factor that was instrumental in letting the Germans down, and we could have monitored where the fuel was going and where it was being stockpiled. But again, the Germans never really had enough fuel to even begin the offensive, much less reach Antwerp. I mean, if we're brutally honest, they didn't have enough supplies, men, tanks, artillery, ammunition, or fuel to even get them to Antwerp. So this is a fantasy attack. All Hitler's generals, including the SS, argued against it, and the only reason why it was launched was Hitler's personal insistence that it was. And by that stage of the war, if you argued against the Führer, you were considered disloyal and ran the risk of execution. So that's really why it took place. New research is now suggesting that Hitler, an unwell man, possibly suffering from Parkinson's, but certainly under the sway of a lot of doctors after the assassination attempt of July 1944, is under a lot of medication. He's an unwell man, and he's possibly a drugged man. So the illogicality of launching this ridiculous attack may well be connected to his state of mind, which is just not normal. It was never normal anyway, but he's now making illogical military decisions, and his generals are just too afraid to oppose him.